This true spine-tingling story happened to a young lady named Miranda, who barely kept her life after a frightful night of despair. This whole thing took place a few years back when I reluctantly moved into my ex-boyfriend's home to help make ends meet. Rick had a 2-bedroom house, and we decided to get busy making it a more cozy place. Because before it was a major bachelor pad, black leather seats, big stereo system, posters of half-naked women on the walls and empty beer bottles everywhere. We decided to transform the smaller bedrooms into an office because the only bathroom was accessible through it. We often would have friends come crash on our sofa, and we didn't want them to walk through our bedroom to use the bathroom. Well, about a month after I moved in Rick's place, he decided to go out with his co-workers after work on a Friday night. I mean, sure, why not? This is just a financial situation, we aren't together or anything. So Friday night I was home alone in this fairly new home. I agreed with Rick this was fine, but I already began to have a chilling, uneasy feeling about being alone. I spent the early evening watching TV and eating some delicious Chinese takeout. Like always, and it never fails, when you're alone you hear a few strange noises. I didn't think much of it. But then, I kept hearing it. Every time I tried to figure out what it was, the noise stopped. It got later, so I decided to go upstairs and use the computer for a bit before going to bed. At that time, we didn't have our phone line set up, so I was using a pay-as-you-go phone with unfortunately no more credit left. That means I couldn't talk to anyone while I was in the house. I sat in the back room with only a small table lamp that gave off a weak light, but as I was typing on the laptop, I heard those strange noises yet again. It would start as a very faint rattling sound, so I had to really listen to make sure it wasn't just my imagination. But now, as you can imagine, my senses are up and on guard. I turned off the music and tried to figure out what was making all the noises. I walked up slowly into our bedroom and looked down at the front door, and nothing. No one was there. I returned to the back bedroom and tried to look out that window, and again nothing. Our backyard was small and surrounded by a tall brick wall. And unfortunately, there was no light near the wooden gate. From what I could see after surveying the backyard, it was clear as well. So I decided it's just me and my imagination running wild, and to just chill and sit back down and turn the music back on. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, I heard a crazy screeching noise, like metal rubbing against metal. Once again, it was very faint, but this time I knew I heard it. Like whatever was causing it was trying really hard to be quiet. So at this point, the hairs on the back of my neck are fully erect, and I'm starting to freak out. So I left our bedroom to get a heavy iron rod that I had found in the back of the closet. I didn't turn on any lights because I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't want to let anyone who might be trying to get in the house know where I was. Remember, I'm alone and I couldn't call anyone. At that time, I was definitely getting pretty worried that there might be someone in my house. I went back into the office bedroom and closed the door as quietly as I could. Then I locked it and placed a chair under the handle for about 20 minutes. Nothing else happened. I began to feel a bit silly and started to question myself again for getting so worked up. I thought to myself, it's gotta be because it was my first night alone in the house and with no phone. I got back on my laptop and I didn't turn the music on again. And it was a good thing because a few minutes later I started hearing sounds like 2 people whispering and both voices were male. Luckily, the voices didn't seem like they were inside the house. So I had the office window open just a bit, and the male voices and noises seemed to be coming from there. I went into the bathroom to get a better look at the alley behind the house. The office bedroom and the bathroom formed an L shape around the yard, and the bathroom extended further out. I climbed up on the ledge and slowly opened the window to see into the alley. I couldn't see anything, but now the whispering was much louder right behind the backyard gate. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard enough to understand what their intentions were, and it wasn't good. These guys had noticed me when I moved in and saw that I had a lot of valuable possessions like guitars, computers, my professional camera, big screen TV, jewelry boxes, and more. I thought they must have noticed that I was home alone and were waiting for me to go to sleep before trying to break into the house. I stayed on that ledge for what felt like a very long time until I heard a really loud thud. Once I heard that, I knew it was going to get ugly. They seemed to have given up on being quiet and were now trying to force their way through the gate. I saw it shaking from their strong pushes and pulls. I'm pretty sure I saw my life pass before me. I could only guess how big these guys were. I'm a small girl, about 5'3" tall, and I weighed around 100 pounds at that time. So I was really scared and had no chance against two men, watching the gate struggling to hold up. I held onto the iron rod, thinking about where I could hide and if they come at me, where I'm going to hit them. Then all of a sudden, a bright light came from behind me. At first I freaked out and hid, thinking they were using a flashlight on the back of the house. But then I heard dogs barking and people shouting. I took another look and I saw that house across the alley had a strong bright light which lit up their yard. I heard some grumbling and swearing, and then two sets of footsteps hurried away down the alley. I stayed in the bathroom, locked in, until my ex-boyfriend finally came home at 4 a.m. drunk as all get out. I screamed at him and told him I needed him to be here. I couldn't sleep at all that night. When I went out into the yard the next morning, the gate was barely hanging on, making it easy for anyone to come in from the alley. When I checked the back of the gate, I saw the keyhole was all scratched up, like someone tried to break the lock. If they hadn't alerted the house behind us, I'm scared to think about what might have happened to me. This next story is about a terrifying sequence of events that could have easily ended up very dark. I'm a 17-year-old female who started working as a babysitter. I did it to earn some extra money to help my parents save up for my college tuition. At that time, we didn't have a lot of money and we didn't want to rely on student loans. At first, I only babysat for my neighbors because it was familiar and easy money. People definitely appreciated how I took care of their kids. More and more parents began to ask me to babysit for them. They especially needed me on the weekends when they had plans or special events. Most of the kids I babysat were easy to look after, so it definitely made the job easier. This experience got me thinking about changing my college major to something that involves working with kids, so I thought about studying child care or pediatric nursing. I really had a passion for babysitting, and I had a strong feeling to protect the kids I looked after. One Friday night, instead of hanging out with my friends, I went to babysit for one of the families I regularly helped. I drove my old Jetta to their big house in the fancy neighborhood. I liked this family because they had a nice home and also paid me very well. When I got there, the parents were already at the door. We quickly said our goodbyes, then they hurried off to some fancy event on Friday night. They had two kids. Both of them were boys. The older child was 5 years old, and the little one was just a year old. They were already sleeping when I arrived, so I didn't have much to do except wait for the parents to come back. I thought about watching a movie, but I was worried it might wake up the kids, and it was pretty late. Then I remember the lady of the house had a nice collection of romance novels, some of which were a bit too grown up for me. I'm pretty sure she knew I read her books, but she didn't seem to mind. I was sitting in the kids' room with the lights off, but there was a nice nightlight which gave me enough light to read and keep an eye on them. I moved the sofa closer to the window to see the streets outside and get all nestled in. It looked like I might be up very late. The book one was reading was really interesting and it kept me engaged for a while. But at some point during the night, I noticed something moving outside the window. I thought it might be the parents coming back home. But it wasn't them, Instead, I saw two guys in dark, ominous clothes. One had a mask covering his whole face, and the other just covered the bottom part of his face. I got really spooked by it and couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. I watched these two guys quietly creep up to the house. But thankfully then I quickly snapped out of it and grabbed my phone. I finally couldn't take it anymore after being really scared and decided to call the mom of the two boys. Her phone rang and rang, but she didn't answer. I didn't try calling her husband because from what I could see outside, I was almost out of time. Those guys were already halfway inside the house. I couldn't see them, but I knew from the breaking of glass and the popping wood, they were almost inside. Luckily, I had locked all the doors and checked them again before going upstairs, otherwise they could have walked right in. I then decided to dial 911, and a lady answered and asked me what was wrong. I explained the situation. Her voice changed from sounding a little bored to sounding very serious. She asked for the address, then told me the police were on their way. But there was a short pause. Then she said, "Gather everyone in the house you're looking after, and try to lock yourselves in a bathroom or hide under a bed." At that moment, I realized that the police wouldn't arrive quickly enough. I needed to escape. But I couldn't just leave the two sleeping kids behind. I started to panic, trying to figure out what to do. Where could I hide? Should I leave the house altogether? This job wasn't worth all this trouble nor my life. I was scared thinking about whether I might get hurt or abducted by those guys. Suddenly, while I was worrying about a million things, I heard the sounds of shattering glass again downstairs. Now I knew I was out of time. I grabbed a chair and pushed it against the door to make it harder for them to get in. Then I rushed to get the baby carrier from the closet in the room. I quickly put the baby in the carrier and strapped him in. The baby got a little restless, but fortunately fell back asleep with the help of a pacifier. The older brother woke up when I touched him. He was about to say something, but I covered his mouth with my hand. Before he could make a peep, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. These guys were attempting to stay quiet, but it was difficult for them. They probably thought everyone in the house was asleep. They were big guys, and trying to be quiet didn't work very well for them. I didn't think the door and the chair would hold them back for long. The older boy stayed quiet for me, even when I took my hand away from his mouth. He looked very scared, and who could blame him? I was scared beyond my wits as well. I took his arm and tried to guide him away from his bed, but he stopped and his face showed he was unhappy. He started to pull away from me, trying to get my hand off his arm. I got really worried. I really didn't want this to happen. He wasn't the kind of kid who just did what he was told. He questioned everything because his parents taught him to be that way. So I bent down and whispered in his ear as quietly as I could, "We have to be really quiet inside this house. Please listen to me and do what I say." After a moment he agreed, probably because of how serious I sounded. I felt relieved that he would follow my instructions, but it didn't last long. I heard someone trying to open the door we were in. They pushed it but couldn't get it to open. I looked at the older boy and he looked terrified. I motioned for him to stay calm and gently rubbed his shoulder. My hands were shaking. I heard the door open. The main bedroom wasn't locked, so I hoped they would spend some time in there. They were opening a different door, not the one we were in. So I took the boy to the window, hoping we had more time, because they were now in our bedroom. I quietly opened the window and climbed onto the roof. It took a bit of convincing, but eventually I got the other boy to come with me. By the time we were on the roof, the men were back at the door, and they were making more noise this time that made the older boy decide to join us on the roof. So we were all outside the house, but I didn't know where to go from there. I had a baby in one hand and a young boy in the other. Finding a safe way to get down with both of them wasn't easy. If I were by myself, I might have taken a risk. But I couldn't leave without the two kids. We were stuck on the roof with nowhere to go. The men broke their way in, so I grabbed the older boy and we huddled in the corner of the roof. The baby was still sleeping, but the boy was scared and held on to me tightly. I silently cried, hoping and praying that someone would come to help us. Suddenly, one of the men opened the window and looked out. I was terrified, and it showed on my face. Our eyes met as he looked at me, and then at the kids I was holding. I thought he might say something. There was a moment when we just looked at each other. Then he suddenly turned away and urgently called out to his partner. "Oh no, I think they saw us coming. They have escaped," which means they might have called the police by now. The burglar said to the other guy, "What do we do now?" But he didn't get an answer. I don't know for sure. But it seemed like the other guy didn't want his friend to find us, as if he knew his friend might do something bad to us. Then I heard them rushing downstairs and their heavy footsteps echoed throughout the whole house. They eventually made it outside, so I thought about going back inside the house to make sure the other one didn't see us here. But I was too scared to move. I watched as both men ran out the back of the house and started heading down the driveway. Then I heard sirens in the distance. The men heard it too and started running faster. They jumped over the fence just before I saw red and blue lights approaching. The police found us on the roof shaking in fear. I was still trembling when they brought us back inside to question us. We finally reached the kids' parents, and they returned to the house in less than half an hour. My parents arrived shortly after. To this day, I never really got over the fear from that night. But I also felt thankful for the men not hurting us. The cops got to us in the nick of time. Who knows what could have happened to us if they hadn't. This frightening third story is about how we think we know people and then how it can all go sideways with just a simple knock on the door. This life-altering story begins with my parents having me when they were very young and had a huge falling out shortly afterwards. They couldn't agree who would take care of me, so my grandma stepped in and decided to take me in. So she raised me for a big part of my life when I was younger, and I am truly grateful for that. She taught me so many important values and how to be a respectful person. But when I turned 15, I moved in with my dad, stepmom, and half-siblings. I had a wonderful life with them, but before moving Inkit, I lived with my mom and her boyfriend Dale for a year in the top part of a duplex. My cool aunt lived nearby, and I visited her a lot because she was awesome. She was in her late 20s, really fun, and very pretty. She had a 1969 Firebird convertible, and we'd cruise around in it listening to Aerosmith back in the 90s. Because of this, I spent some time with her brother Jeff, who rented a room in her basement. I thought Jeff was a bit strange, but later he seemed okay. One night around 1130, I was home alone when I heard a knock at the door. Our door had a glass window near the top, but it was painted over with a small hole scratched into the paint for looking through. I looked through it, and it was my aunt's brother, Jeff. So I opened the door and said, "Hey, what's going on?" Jeff asked if my mom or Dale were home. I told him my mom was at work, and I had no idea where Dale was. Then he asked if I could come downstairs into the basement because he wanted to talk to me. I trusted him because I thought of him as family. I was a bit shy back then, so I didn't like saying no to people. I followed him down the stairs, then went out to the back patio area. I saw his car parked on the street with the headlights on. As we walked towards his car, I could see in the passenger seat there was the guy who looked like the Jerky Boys character, the one who hung out with my mom's boyfriend. Jeff then turned and said, "Hey, we want to talk to you. We have something to ask." Then he gently tried to guide me into the car. Now my heart started racing and suddenly, I felt like something was wrong. I stopped and pulled back a bit, trying not to show fear. Jeff kept talking softly and touched my shoulder to fix my spaghetti strap. He said, "It's okay. Just come closer to me." I politely pulled away and told him it was fine and just asked me right here. He kept gently trying to convince me to get into the car to talk, saying it was okay and you don't need to be scared. He suggested I come over and stand in front of the headlights. As soon as he mentioned standing in front of the headlights, my stomach churned in fear and my whole body felt on edge. I knew that if I stood there, I wouldn't be able to see well and it might make it easier for one of them to grab me. At that moment, I realized I was in a very dangerous situation. So I pretended to act a little silly and clueless, because I was scared that if they realized I suspected something wrong, they might grab me to keep me quiet. I thought he might even cover my mouth and pull me into the car. So I made a playful joke saying I wasn't wearing shoes and didn't want to step in dog poop. Then I saw the jerky boy quickly popping out of the car, so I quickly sprinted back to the house. I ran as fast as I could back inside the house and spun around to lock the basement door, then zoomed up the stairs to lock the front door. I was shaking with fear and my heart pounding out of my chest, and I was nearly out of breath. About a minute later, the jerky boy knocked on the door and peered through the small hole. He said he needed to talk to my mom's boyfriend. I told him my mom's boyfriend wasn't home, and he then stepped away from the door, but he didn't leave. About 30 seconds later, Jeff came around to the front of the house and knocked. He talked through the door, saying he needed to talk to my mom's boyfriend, and tried to open the door, but it was locked. I repeated to them again that they weren't home. Then Jeff started saying things like, "I'm sorry we scared you, honey, but we just want to talk to you about your mom and Dale. You see, Dale owes us a lot of money, and his time is up to pay." I got scared they might try to break in and grab me for ransom money, so I decided with them both hovering at the front door, I'd sneak out the back. I walked toward the back door, and I'm really glad I looked out the back window first, because the jerky boy person was actually standing outside by the back door downstairs. So Jeff was at the front door talking nicely to me and his friend was waiting by the back door. I'm so screwed. I know what you might be thinking, right? Call the police. I'm not sure why I didn't. Maybe because I was so inexperienced and shy and this guy was my relative, my friend. I also had doubts about myself and my judgment, because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. I got to the front door, and Jeff was still there talking to me, saying he felt bad for scaring me. I spoke through the door, trying my best not to show fear. I said it was okay, and he kept apologizing again and again for frightening me. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I tried to calm him down and make him believe that I trusted him. They eventually left. My adrenaline was so high that I almost collapsed from being so worn out. When I knew without a doubt it was safe, I sneaked out and ran to my friend's house next door. I didn't tell them what happened. I just said that I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mom came home. I did tell my mom about it. Thankfully, nothing serious happened. 3 months later, I moved to my dad's house, which was 45 miles away, and I never saw them again. When I think back on it now, years after it happened, I realize just how dangerous that situation was. I'm so glad I followed my instincts, went back inside and locked the door. Because as most of you can imagine, they had very bad intentions toward me. I could have been kidnapped or even worse, killed. In this final harrowing tale, it describes the real-life chilling account of being an accidental witness to a terrifying crime. Previously, I lived in a small town in the northeast of England that was surrounded by fields and smaller villages. Because of this, very few serious crimes happened here. The worst thing I can remember is a stabbing about 8 years ago. And more recently, a friend of mine got hurt because he was drunk, and 2 teenagers decided to pick on him. He ended up with a lot of bruises. But he was okay. This is just to help you understand what my town is like. But last month, I moved to a not-so-nice part of town, where most of the trouble happens. There was even a guy who thought it was funny to leave half a rabbit on the doorstep of a store as a prank. And living next to it means you hear a lot of noise at night. I had spent 3 years in the city while I was at university, so I got used to all the constant noise, sirens, traffic, and such. When I came back to my quiet town, it took me a while to get used to the quiet again. During that time, I would hear a lot of strange things and sometimes even see strange things. In those first few nights, I had trouble falling asleep. So I'd lay in bed, trying to sleep without any luck. I should mention that in my town there are 4 common noises I hear. There's a clock that chimes every 15 minutes. Teenagers who think they're cool, playing loud music past their bedtime, and sometimes drunk people. As I lay there trying to sleep, I would hear voices. I'd look out the window and see people walking by, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then there was a drunk person yelling about fighting someone. And after that, a random guy walking home alone, probably after having a few drinks himself. More days passed with more noise. But then one day, I heard a frightful scream. It sounded like it was a little girl, upset as if her mom scolded her for something. There was shouting too, and the screaming went on, then slowly faded away until it stopped. I thought maybe it was just a tired child who stayed out too late with irresponsible parents, which wasn't uncommon there. So I went on night after night trying to sleep. The interesting part didn't happen until about a week later. I was playing a game called Sims 4 at around 1:30 a.m. when I heard a deep, scary scream, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound was echoing pretty badly, or it was on the road nearby behind the houses in front of mine. Either way, I lost interest in the screaming as it faded and stopped after a few seconds, so I still couldn't figure out where it was coming from. 2 more nights passed. Once again, I'm playing Sims 4, and I hear the screaming. This time it's much closer, close enough that I should be able to see it if it weren't nighttime. This time it was a woman's voice yelling help, followed by a blood-curdling scream. We don't have many streetlights on our street, maybe just 1 or 2. There is a good 50 meters or so between the streetlights where it is very dark. So I'm trying my best to see, but it's not working. I was getting into bed and suddenly I heard a rumbling bike going by. I peeked out my window, but I couldn't see any signs of a bike. While I was looking, a man suddenly appeared from the dark part of the road. He seemed like he was just walking down the road, and I didn't think there was a problem until he stopped right in front of my house. I quickly turned off my lamp and hid out of sight. I think he just saw me. The streetlight I mentioned earlier is right across from my house, so it shines right into my room and I couldn't watch from the darkness. The streetlight illuminates anyone facing it. When I leaned to see if he had left, I was horrified to spot him by my garden fence, staring right at my window, looking directly at me with an ominous look on his face. I panicked and hid again, listening carefully for any sounds of him leaving. After about 5 minutes, I heard footsteps, but it was terrifying because they seemed to be coming up the steps into my garden. Now I was too scared to look, but I gathered enough courage and stayed in the dark. When I finally did look, he saw me frozen in fear. He rushed up and grabbed my door handle and started using his shoulder to ram it out. I screamed in absolute disbelief and despair. After a few hits, he broke the door open, but thankfully with all that noise it woke up my 1-year-old English bulldog dog named Buster. He started barking and then lunged towards the broken door, and the strange man. With the growling and loud barking, the man hesitated to enter the house. The intruder gave me one last look while I'm in the corner of the room, frozen in fear. He then dashed away, and I could hear his bike start up and drive away quickly. It turns out the scary intruder showed up to his ex-wife's home and brutally assaulted her and her new boyfriend. I thank God for my dog Buster, or I might not be here to tell you about this terrifying story. But still today I'm living with the fear that he might come back to my house to finish the job. A few months back, I moved out of my parents' place. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I could only get a place in the worst part of town. This building seemed like the safest place in the part of town I had to move to, and I refused to go back to my parents. Everything was fine except the rent was pretty high. I put out an ad for a roommate on all the places I could think of and finally got a hit on Craigslist. That really should have been red flag number 1, now that I think of it. He seemed like an alright dude. His name was Jackson, and there was about 2 years of age difference between us, him being 25 and me being 23. I know I should have moved out a long time ago. That's another story. But everything was okay for a few months, like I mentioned before. He would come home late in the day, sometimes at night, and he'd leave early in the morning. I personally would not want that job. Anyways, he seemed to have the weekends off, so it was an okay situation. At least he never complained about it. So on the weekends, we would go and get something to eat, hang out at places, or just eat at home. This is where my problem started with him. For some unknown reason, he never picked up after himself. He'd leave his trash by the front door, never taking it out, to the point that whatever was in the bag would start to rot. I really don't know why I never checked the bags. I should have checked the bags. He'd leave his dishes in the sink, and whenever I washed them, the water would turn a murky brown color. These were all only knives and sharp objects. Why didn't I notice that before? Anyways, I refused to wash them because it was just disgusting, and he should be able to clean up after himself. Whenever I brought it up to him, he'd get angry and storm into his room, muttering something about getting caught in the police. I just brushed it off like he was crazy, which he probably is in hindsight. This made me afraid to bring it up to him. I was still fine with him being in the apartment. After all, he was on the lease. I didn't really have a choice but to be okay with it. Another weird thing, he never wanted to watch the news. If we were watching TV and the news came on, he would either turn the TV off or change the channel. When he wasn't around, I looked up the stories for that day, stuff about murder. Maybe he's got PTSD, and that stuff triggers him. I don't know. It definitely doesn't sit right with me, though. Maybe I'm overreacting. I'm not really sure what to make of this situation. When we go out in public, he's always wearing a mask and sunglasses, as if he's afraid to be seen. He never wants to go to places with a lot of people. He would rather stay at home. I'm a homebody to an extent, but even I like to go out sometimes. I really don't get it. I just don't. It's like he's a murderer or something. I doubt that's the case. I would have noticed, or would I have? Thinking back on it, maybe he is. I mean, it all lines up. I'm probably just overreacting though, right? Yeah, I'm overreacting. I just can't get over the thought. I don't know what to do. Another thing that's weird, he spends hours in the basement of the apartment complex. I've asked the owner of the building if he's okay with this, and he seemed to have no problems. He seemed nervous when I asked, though. He said that he heard some commotion in the alleyway by the apartment, and when he went to check it out, he saw my roommate hurting someone. He said he got away without my roommate seeing him, but he's still scared that my roommate saw him. He then asked my landlord for the keys to the basement. Not wanting to get hurt, he gave them to my roommate. I wanted to investigate, but I don't want to risk it. What if I get caught? Or what if, because of my paranoia, an innocent person dies in the basement? I would rather just not attempt it. I don't know what to do. I'm scared that he'll find this. I want to kick him out, but the manager of the apartment seems scared of him, and by what he said, for good reason. I think I should be too. I just don't know what to do. I'm scared that he'll see this post. I'm afraid that he's going to do something bad. Should I go to the police about this? What if they find something? Or worse, they don't, and I'm just crazy and the one that falsely accused his roommate of murder. What happens then? I don't know what to do. I've been watching the news closely for a story about a murderer, but nothing. I think I'm going to confront him. If I don't update, I'm dead. I really hope I'm just paranoid. Oh God, he's here. He's unlocking the door to the apartment. I have to go. These may well be my last words. If they are, I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I was such a bad son. I love you. Goodbye, hopefully not forever. Does your door have a peephole? When you finish reading this, go to your door and look through it. Tell me what you see. My wife and I are in a tough place. She lost her job at the start of lockdown, and that's left us on a limited income. Our lease was up at the end of August, so we started looking for a new place to move into on September 1st. When we started looking, we were concerned. Los Angeles is an expensive city, and a single income is a tough thing to navigate for any young couple. But considering unemployment is as high as it is, some places have been running deals. My wife found a great one on Craigslist, and best of all, the first month was free. So we went to check it out. It was a big, old, quirky apartment in the Hollywood Hills, kind of ornate, thick front door, great bathroom with funky tiles, natural light in the dining area. We'd have to buy big curtains to block out and on-site laundry. Parking was a bit of a nightmare. If you're not familiar with LA, the hills are no joke. But the price was right, and we only shared one wall. Plus, the first month was free. We were smart. This wasn't our first apartment. We tried everything, every switch, opened every cabinet and window, took pictures of every drop of paint on the ground, tried all the locks. You name it, we were thorough. The landlord assured us over the phone that it was a quiet building with quiet neighbors, thick wood floors, and a manager that lived off-site. We never met anyone in person, but the place was very clean, and we were told they were looking for a new tenant as soon as possible. The last people had moved out unexpectedly. We didn't hear that last part, we just heard that the first month was free. So we applied and got it. They took us with my terrible credit and the single income between us. In 2014, I had to fight two bearded weirdos who turned out to be half a punk band from Austin for the last apartment application at a place in Atwater Village. So honestly, the biggest red flag was how easy it was, but my wife insisted that this was all good. It was a chance for her to reevaluate her career, an excuse to downsize. The move was going to be a great opportunity, and she'd make my favorite dinner the first night. September 1st came, and the move went smoothly. A couple of friends drove over to help us move, but we wore our masks the whole time. Moving couches upstairs is no fun, no matter what's on your face. But I didn't mind. I was just grateful for the help. My wife made good on her promise too, and so that first night I really thought that she was right, that it was all good. The next morning I found our front door unlocked and open. I chalked it up to a mistake I had made, that my wife had made. We laughed it off. Can't let that happen again. Clearly we were tired from the move. We'd order in that night, so we spent the day unpacking. I can work from home, so I did a little heavy lifting, but mostly my wife did it all. She's got better taste than I do when it comes to those things. And she'd let me pick dinner that night. Our favorite Italian place on Hillhurst just closed, so we tried a new spot. We splurged a little to celebrate our new move, and why not? The place we picked had bottles of wine on sale. Postmates gave us an hour, so we fooled around until the driver arrived. I missed the text from the app and the call from the driver, so we were a little startled when we heard a knock at the door. I pulled on some pants and ran out of my bedroom to the front hall, stopping to look out the peephole. I nearly screamed. In the 2 inches between my side of the door and the outside, someone had inserted a number of very tiny miniatures. Not many people know that Craigslist once had a dating section. This might be one of the most foolish things I've ever done, and I've done some pretty foolish things in my life. I was freshly 23, just out of a bad relationship with someone I'd met online, and looking for someone new to date. At the time, many people were using Craigslist for casual one-night stands, but I didn't know that. I thought it was just another dating website. So I posted an ad for a relationship, but it was actually me who started a conversation with someone. My ad never got any responses. I met a guy who responded to me immediately, and we exchanged phone numbers. He lived in my area, so I wouldn't have to travel far to meet him. Things moved quickly, but he was very attentive. I thought if it was meant to be, the speed didn't matter. We met at a nice restaurant. He was older, already in his 40s, but I didn't let that bother me. Our first night out was great. He had lots of money and made sure I knew it. Looking back, that was a red flag I ignored. I can already hear you thinking it, but yes, I know now. After our first date, I was all in for a relationship, and so was he. We went out about once a week due to our different schedules, but in my mind, we were already dating. Time passed, and I enjoyed my boyfriend who really seemed to get me. He said all the right things at the right times, making me feel he was the only one for me. Each time we met, we grew closer. We even visited each other's houses for small dates, though my parents hated that I was dating someone twice my age. They never tried to stop me, though. After a while, I got curious about how he spent his time when we weren't together. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I wanted to know more about him. The mystery had wooed me, but now I needed clarity. I'm glad I found out, but I didn't like what I discovered. He claimed he owned a business downtown selling sandwiches. I visited a few times to see him, but he was never there. I told an employee I was dating the owner, and he thought I was gay because the owner was a woman. That was the only shop fitting his description. I thought I had the wrong place, so I asked him on our next date to show me his store. He took me to that same sandwich shop owned by a woman. So he was a liar. If he lied about this, what else was he lying about? I found out when I trailed him for a day. I know I became a stalker trying to find the truth. Don't make excuses for me, I was wrong too. I saw him with another woman in the next town over. I confronted him, asking who she was. He said she was his sister. She immediately corrected him, saying she was his girlfriend. We both got angry, and he admitted he was collecting dates. We were just trophies to him, part of an experiment to see how many women he could date at once. He wasn't remorseful at all. He told us there were around 10 women he was dating. He promised to tell them and end it, but I doubt he did. After we left, we vented in the parking lot, but ultimately went our separate ways. I went to get my friend to go to a bar. On the way, I drove through a green light when suddenly we were on the side of the road crawling out of the car. My head hurt from hitting the window. The car that hit us took off. I called the cops, who asked many questions. The ambulance and fire trucks came, but we were fine. My car was totaled and undrivable. I only remembered being hit, but traffic cameras caught the incident. The cops found out it was the Craigslist guy who hit us and fled. I believe he did it on purpose, but since it couldn't be proven, he was only charged with leaving the scene of an accident. Craigslist personals were taken down shortly after due to trafficking concerns. I'm glad because you don't want to use Craigslist for anything. A few years later, I found someone else through another dating app. It worked out, and we've been together for a long time. We even got married. I'm not advocating for online dating, but sometimes good things can come out of it. I once dated a guy from a website you might have heard of, but not for this reason. Craigslist used to have a section for finding people to sleep with for a night, and that's what I was looking for. Yes, I was a fellow degenerate not looking for a relationship. I met a guy named Ben. He was around my age. We got together for a night, never expecting to see each other again, but he made numerous attempts to impress me. I never thought this could happen, but he turned out to be a cool person and tried to get me to go to dinner afterwards. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. I ended up having a great time with him. We saw each other several more times for the same thing an evening at a hotel followed by a restaurant. We started hanging out more, and eventually he asked if I enjoyed my time with him. I told him honestly that it had been fun and I wished it wouldn't end. We ended up dating, which isn't the best love story, but it's more realistic. I hated my home life, so any way out was fine with me. Ben had a house all to himself and invited me to move in right away if I wanted to. I did. I moved out of my parents' house and into his. If you're wondering, yes, this was a huge mistake that I regret to this day. I can't take it back, but I've learned from it. This was my last internet date. Don't worry, I'm still alive. When I moved in, Ben changed completely. It started with small things like telling me not to touch certain items in the house, but escalated to not letting me do anything at all. He was very possessive. At first, I didn't mind because I was new in the house and respected that he had built a life there. He began setting rules for me, like informing him when I left or came home. I was okay with that because he was paranoid about intruders, but he went overboard. He told me he didn't have any enemies, and I thought he was being excessive, but I respected it. In the end, he just wanted to control everything. It wasn't about safety. He never had anyone over either. Most days, I'd sit in the living room watching TV or playing on a crappy computer that wasn't mine. He'd stay in the back room doing whatever he did and didn't want to be disturbed. I found that unattractive, but I couldn't leave either. If I disturbed him to say I was leaving, he'd get mad and yell that I was ruining his work. If I left without telling him, he'd call me nonstop until I answered and would lock me out if I got back too late. The cool guy I fell in love with seemed more like an angry dad than a boyfriend. I never wanted to live this way, but I didn't think about leaving just yet. It was either live there basically alone, never leaving, or go back to my awful, abusive parents. This was the best alternative for me at the time. One day I wanted to go out with a friend to her party. I didn't tell Ben because he didn't want to be disturbed, and I was gone all day and most of the night. He wasn't spending time with me anyway, so what was the problem? Well, when I came back, he had a problem. He told me I shouldn't come in that late and started to beat on me. After his fit, he expected me to lay down in the same bed with him and sleep soundly like nothing happened. I went from being in love with him to being absolutely afraid of him. I wanted to leave and go anywhere else. That morning when he locked himself in his back room, I did. I took my small amount of stuff and went back to my parents' house. They didn't let me back in. My dad was glad I left and made me feel like I was the reason he was so abusive. My mom was no different. So I became homeless at that moment. I called a nearby friend and had her come get me so I could move in with her. She was angry that I waited so long to move into a safe place, but she still let me in. Once I moved in with her, Ben came looking for me. He told me to get in the car and go back home with him, or he would burn the house down. We called the police because my friend had filmed him yelling that at me from his car. The video quality was bad, but the audio was clear. Ben never came back after that. We gave the evidence to the cops, but I think they didn't take it seriously. Ben made a threat and didn't follow through, so the cops probably just ignored it. I never saw Ben again and hopefully never will. It's been a long time, and I've almost forgotten what he even looks like. Maybe that's for the best. I found a new boyfriend later, and we're still dating, but I don't plan to move in with him anytime soon. Trust me, I've learned my lesson. The last thing I want is another controlling person telling me when to breathe.